Mira didn't know that the exhausted stranger she'd collided with in the castle's shadowed corridor was the most powerful alpha in the Seven Kingdoms. She didn't know that his amber eyes had been searching every face in the castle for weeks, hunting for something, someone he couldn't name. And she certainly didn't know that the moment her cleaning supplies scattered across the stone floor, she had just found her fate. The bucket hit the ground with a metallic clang that echoed through the empty hallway, dirty water spreading across ancient stones like spilled secrets. Mira dropped to her knees instantly, her heart hammering against her ribs as she scrambled to gather the scattered brushes and rags. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not daring to look up at the figure towering over her. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you. I was just—" "Stop." The voice cut through her panic like a blade through silk, deep, commanding. Something in her chest pulled tight at the sound of it, a strange warmth unfurling behind her sternum that made no sense at all. "Please," she continued, still focused on the mess, "I know I'm not supposed to be in this wing after sunset, but Mrs. Harwick asked me to finish the Lord's chambers before morning, and I—" Warm fingers touched her chin, tilting her face upward. The touch sent heat shooting up her spine, settling somewhere dangerous and desperate in the space between her heartbeats. Impossible eyes met hers. Golden amber, like honey caught in firelight, like the warm glow of sunset through ancient glass. She'd never seen eyes like that, never felt her breath catch in her throat like this, as if the air had suddenly become too thick to breathe. "You don't need to apologize for existing," he said quietly. The words hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had spoken to her like that? Like she was a person instead of an obstacle to step around? Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at directly. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it, and a face that belonged in the tapestries hanging in the great hall, noble and fierce and impossibly perfect. The kind of man who would never notice someone like her under normal circumstances. So why was he looking at her like she was the only person in the world? She tried again, but the words tangled on her tongue. "Are you hurt?" His voice carried an edge of something that might have been concern, might have been something deeper. His hand was still touching her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "No," she managed, though her knees were scraped from hitting the stone and her palm stung where she'd caught herself. None of that mattered compared to the way he was looking at her. "No, I'm fine." He studied her for a long moment, those impossible eyes searching her face for something she couldn't name. The golden thread of warmth in her chest pulled tighter, like a rope drawing her towards something she didn't understand. "What's your name?" The question was simple. The way he asked it, like her answer was the most important thing in the world, was anything but. "Mira," she whispered, "Mira." He repeated her name like he was tasting it, rolling it around on his tongue to see how it fit. Something flickered across his expression. Relief? Recognition? "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, she answered automatically, then caught herself. Why was she telling him this? She should be apologizing, gathering her things, disappearing back into the shadows where servants belonged. Instead, she was kneeling on a cold stone floor, staring up at a stranger who made her feel like she was burning alive from the inside out. 3 years, he murmured, and there was something almost pained in his voice. "And I've never seen you before." "Because you don't see people like me," she almost said. "Because I'm nothing, because I'm no one." The words pressed against her teeth, familiar and bitter, but something in his expression stopped her. He was looking at her like she mattered, like she was precious instead of invisible, important instead of disposable. It was probably a mistake. He probably thought she was someone else, someone worthy of that kind of attention. But for just this moment she wanted to pretend it was real. "I work mostly night," she said instead, "the early morning shift, before the castle wakes up." "Alone?" Something in the way he said that single word sent a shiver down her spine. protective, almost possessive. Usually, she swallowed hard, it's easier, quieter. Safer? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. No one had ever cared whether she felt safe walking these halls in the dark hours before dawn, when the shadows were thick and the corridors empty. Yes, she admitted quietly, safer. He nodded, as if this made perfect sense, as if her safety was something that mattered to him. The rational part of her mind whispered that this was impossible, that men like him didn't care about the safety of castle cleaners, but the warmth spreading through her chest told a different story. You shouldn't have to hide to feel safe, he said, and there was steel in his voice now. Anger, but not at her, for her. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Real fear spiked through her. If Mrs. Harwick found her here, chatting with a guest instead of working, she'd lose her position for certain. Maybe worse. She scrambled to gather the last of her supplies, but his hand closed gently over her wrist. Wait! The touch sent liquid fire racing up her arm. Golden warmth pooled in her chest, behind her ribs, settling there like it belonged, like it had always belonged there. I have to go, she whispered, even though every instinct she'd developed over 3 years of survival was screaming at her to stay right here, in this impossible moment, with this impossible man. Not yet. The footsteps were getting closer, male voices, low and urgent, approaching fast. Please, she breathed. He released her immediately, stepping back to give her space, but those amber eyes never left her face. Will you be here tomorrow night? The question shouldn't have sent her heart racing. She shouldn't have wanted to say yes with every fibre of her being. Yes, same route, same time. Good. The word was barely more than a whisper, but it hit her like a promise, like a vow. The voices were almost upon them now. She clutched her bucket and supplies to her chest and fled down the corridor, her footsteps echoing off the stone walls. At the corner, she risked one glance back. He was still watching her, still looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. The golden warmth in her chest pulsed once, hard, and then she rounded the corner, and he was gone. Mira pressed her back against the cold stone wall, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst from her chest. What had just happened? She replayed the encounter in her mind as she made her way back to the servants' quarters. The way he'd looked at her, the way he'd touched her face like she was made of spun glass, the way he'd said her name like it meant something. She was no one, a castle cleaner with rough hands and borrowed clothes, invisible to everyone who mattered. Men like him, beautiful, powerful men who walked these halls like they owned them, didn't notice girls like her. But he had noticed. More than noticed. The golden warmth still pulsed behind her ribs, steady as a second heartbeat. Tomorrow night, he'd said. He wanted to see her again. Mira curled up in her narrow cot, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. For the first time in 3 years, she fell asleep thinking about something other than survival. She fell asleep thinking about amber eyes and gentle hands, and the impossible possibility that someone might actually want her to exist. Tomorrow night couldn't come fast enough. Mira had lived through exactly 24 hours of thinking about amber eyes and gentle hands when Mrs. Harwick's sharp voice cut through her daydream like a blade. "Report to my office immediately." The words landed like a physical blow, sending ice through her veins. In 3 years of working at the castle, Mira had been summoned to the head housekeeper's office exactly twice. Once when she'd started the position, and once when a lord's son had accused her of stealing a silver candlestick she'd never even touched. Both times had ended badly. She set down her scrub brush with hands that trembled only slightly and made the long walk through the castle's winding corridors. Each step felt like walking toward an execution. Mrs. Harwick's office was located in the administrative wing, far from the servants' quarters, in a part of the castle that reminded Mira constantly that she didn't belong. The door stood open. Mrs. Harwick sat behind her mahogany desk, but she wasn't alone. Mira's breath caught in her throat. The stranger from last night sat in one of the velvet chairs, perfectly at ease, as if he owned the very air in the room, which, judging by the way Mrs. Harwick was practically vibrating with nervous energy, he very well might. "Ah, Mira," Mrs. Harwick said, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "Please come in, close the door." Mira's hands shook as she pulled the heavy door shut behind her. The golden warmth in her chest flared to life the moment her eyes met his, that impossible amber gaze that had haunted her dreams. "Sit," he said quietly, gesturing to the chair beside him. It wasn't a request. It wasn't an order either, exactly, but something in between that made her legs move before her brain caught up. She perched on the edge of the chair, clutching her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "Your Majesty," Mrs. Harwick began, and Mira's world tilted sideways. "Your Majesty." The words rang in her ears like bells, like warning sirens, like the sound of her entire understanding of reality crashing down around her. The stranger from the corridor, the man who had touched her face with gentle hands and looked at her like she mattered. He was the king. "You must be mistaken," she stammered, the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. There's been some mistake. I couldn't possibly—" King Aldrich, because that's who he was, that's who she'd been talking to like an equal, who she'd been dreaming about like some love-sick fool, turned those impossible eyes on her. They were glowing, actually glowing, amber fire flickering in their depths like candlelight behind honey. "I've been searching for you for years," he said simply. The statement was absurd, impossible. Kings didn't search for castle cleaners. Kings didn't even know castle cleaners existed, let alone spend years looking for them. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Mrs. Harwick," he said, never taking his eyes from Mira's face. "Leave us." The head housekeeper practically tripped over herself in her haste to comply. The door clicked shut with a finality that made Mira's heart race. They were alone. The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, so tight it was almost painful. She could feel something building in the air between them, electric and dangerous and completely beyond her understanding. "You felt it too," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Last night, when I touched you." Heat flooded her cheeks. She had felt it. The warmth, the impossible pull, the way her entire body had responded to his touch like it had been waiting for it her whole life. "I felt something," she admitted quietly. "The bond," he said, as if that explained everything, as if those two words could make sense of the impossible situation she found herself in. The mating bond. Mira's breath caught. She'd heard whispers, of course, stories told in the servants' quarters late at night, fairy tales about wolf-shifters and their destined mates, ancient magic that bound two souls together across time and space. But those were just stories, weren't they? "You're my mate, Mira," he continued, his voice gentle but certain. "My destined partner, the other half of my soul." The words should have sounded insane. They should have sent her running for the door, screaming about mad kings and impossible claims. Instead, something deep inside her chest recognized the truth of them. The golden warmth pulsed once, hard, as if in agreement. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" He leaned forward slightly, close enough that she could catch his scent, cedar and rain and something wild that made her wolfless human heart race. "Tell me you haven't thought about me every moment since last night. Tell me you don't feel that pull in your chest, that warmth that started the second our eyes met." She couldn't, because he was right about all of it. "You're the king," she said instead, as if that was an argument against everything he was telling her. "Yes? And I'm nobody. I'm a servant. I clean your floors and wash your linens and—" "You're everything." The conviction in his voice stopped her cold. He said it like it was the most obvious truth in the world, like there was no universe in which she could be anything less than precious. "I've been looking for you for 7 years," he continued, "since the day I became king. I've travelled to every pack in the 7 kingdoms, met with every eligible woman from here to the Northlands. I've attended more balls and gatherings and diplomatic dinners than I can count, always searching for the one person who could make this emptiness inside me feel whole. His hand moved slowly across the space between them, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when she sat frozen with her heart hammering against her ribs, his fingers brushed against hers. Lightning, pure electricity shooting up her arm, spreading through her chest, settling deep in her bones like molten gold. "And all this time," he whispered, "you were here, right here, walking these halls, and I never knew." "Because you don't see people like me," she said, and the bitterness in her voice surprised even her. His expression darkened. "No, because someone has been very careful to make sure our paths never crossed. Someone who knew exactly what would happen when they did." The implication in his words sent a chill down her spine. "What do you mean?" "How often do you work the main corridors, Mira? How often are you assigned to areas where you might encounter guests, nobles, or anyone of importance?" She thought about it. In 3 years, last night had been the first time she'd been in the main wing after sunset. Her assignments were always the servants' quarters, the lower levels, the forgotten corners of the castle that no one important ever visited. "Never," she admitted. "Exactly." His jaw tightened. "Someone has been very deliberately keeping you hidden. The question is why?" Fear crept up her throat. "Maybe because I don't belong in those places. Maybe because I'm just... Don't!" The word cut through her self-deprecation like a blade. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. You belong wherever you choose to be, and I choose for you to be here, with me." The certainty in his voice made her chest ache. When was the last time someone had spoken to her like that? Like her choices mattered, like her presence was desired instead of tolerated. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. "Neither did I until last night." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, sending fresh sparks of warmth up her arm. "For 7 years I've felt incomplete, empty, like half of me was missing, and I was just walking through the motions of being alive. And then you crashed into me in that corridor, and suddenly everything made sense." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that someone like him could want someone like her, could see something in her worth claiming, worth protecting. But the rational part of her mind whispered all the reasons it was impossible. Kings didn't mate with servants. Fairy tale bonds didn't exist in the real world. And men like him, beautiful, powerful, perfect, didn't choose women like her. "What happens now?" she asked, because she couldn't bring herself to voice any of those fears aloud. "Now," he said, standing and offering her his hand, "you let me show you that you're not nobody. You're not invisible. You're the most important person in this entire kingdom, because you're mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent liquid heat pooling in her belly, made the golden thread in her chest sing with recognition. She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, knowing that taking it would change everything, knowing that once she accepted what he was offering, there would be no going back to her small, safe, invisible life. "You don't even know me," she said. "Then let me learn you." His voice was soft, patient, like he had all the time in the world to wait for her decision. "Let me prove to you that this is real, that you are everything I've been searching for." The golden warmth pulsed again, stronger now, pulling her toward him like gravity, like inevitability. Slowly, trembling, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and steady, and the bond between them flared to life like a struck match. She gasped at the intensity of it, at the way it felt like coming home and setting herself on fire at the same time. "There you are," he murmured, and something in his voice told her he wasn't just talking about her hand in his. "I've been waiting so long to find you." When he looked at her like that, with those amber eyes full of wonder and possession and something that might have been love, She could almost believe it was true. She could almost believe she was worth searching for. The days that followed were a whirlwind of impossible adjustments and careful steps around a reality that still felt too fragile to be real. Mira woke the morning after her world changed to find a breakfast tray outside her door in the servants' quarters. Real porcelain plates instead of the chipped ceramic bowls they usually used, fresh fruit instead of leftover bread, tea that smelled like bergamot and honey instead of the bitter brew they made from reused leaves. A note written in elegant handwriting rested beside the teacup. "You shouldn't have to eat scraps. You're not a servant here anymore. You're my mate." La. Her hands trembled as she read those words. My mate. As if it could be that simple. As if 24 hours could erase a lifetime of being invisible, of being nothing. She ate every bite, even though her stomach was twisted in knots, even though part of her expected someone to burst through the door and accuse her of stealing food meant for her betters. When she finished, she found herself staring at the empty tray, unsure what to do next. For 3 years, her mornings had been the same. Wake before dawn, gather her supplies, begin the endless cycle of scrubbing and cleaning and trying to remain invisible. But she wasn't supposed to clean anymore. She was supposed to be, what? A queen in training? The thought was so absurd it made her laugh, a short, sharp sound that held no humour. A soft knock at her door interrupted her spiralling thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Harwick with a new set of impossible instructions. Instead, King Aldrich stepped through the doorway, and the golden warmth in her chest flared to life like a struck match. He was dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, dark trousers and a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and there was something almost nervous in his amber eyes. The King of the 7 Kingdoms was nervous. Because of her. "Good morning," he said, and his voice was softer than she remembered, gentler. "Your Majesty," she began, starting to rise from her small chair, but he held up a hand. "Aldrich," he corrected. "Just Aldrich, please." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate, like a secret she wasn't supposed to know. "I brought you something," he continued, and she noticed for the first time that he carried a package wrapped in brown paper. "You don't need to bring me things," she said automatically. "You've already. The breakfast was too much. I can't accept—" "Mira." The way he said her name stopped the words in her throat. "You're my mate. Do you understand what that means?" She shook her head because she didn't. Not really. She understood fairy tales and whispered stories, but this was real life, and real life didn't work like the tales servants told each other in the dark. He set the package on her small table and moved to sit on her narrow cot, the only other place in the tiny room. The sight of him there, surrounded by her meagre belongings, should have looked ridiculous. Instead, it made her chest ache with something she couldn't name. "It means," he said quietly, "that your happiness is my responsibility now. Your comfort, your safety, your needs, all of it matters to me more than anything else in this kingdom." "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it?" He leaned forward slightly, amber eyes intent on her face. "When you're hungry, I feel it here." He pressed a hand to his chest. "When you're afraid, it tears through me like a physical wound. When you smiled at me yesterday, really smiled, not that careful, frightened expression you wear for everyone else. It felt like the sun coming up after the longest winter of my life." The words hit her like physical blows, each one landing in the space behind her ribs where the golden warmth lived. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that someone could care about her comfort, her happiness, her needs. But 3 years of surviving in a world that had taught her she was disposable had carved those lessons deep into her bones. "You barely know me," she said. "Then tell me about yourself." His voice was patient, as if he had all the time in the world for this conversation. "Help me know you." The request was so simple, so genuine, that it completely undid her careful defences. When was the last time someone had asked her about herself? When had anyone cared about her thoughts, her history, her dreams? "There's nothing interesting to tell," she said automatically. "I doubt that." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "For instance, how did you end up working here? Where did you come from?" The questions everyone always avoided asking. The questions that led to uncomfortable truths about illegitimate births and abandoned children and families who saw their own blood as nothing more than a burden to be discarded. "You don't want to know about that," she said quietly. "Mira." He said her name like a prayer, like something precious. "I want to know everything about you, the good, the bad, the parts you think make you unworthy, all of it." Something in his voice made her believe he meant it, made her think that maybe, just maybe, he might hear her truth and not turn away in disgust. "My mother was a maid in a noble house," she began, the words feeling rusty from disuse. Lord Harrington's house in the Western Provinces. She was young and foolish and thought that when his lordship paid attention to her, it meant something more than it did. Aldrich's expression darkened, but he didn't speak, didn't interrupt her story with judgment or false comfort. And when she told him she was with child, he had her thrown out. No references, no coin, nothing. "She died when I was 7, and Lord Harrington refused to acknowledge that I was his blood. Said she was probably whoring around, and the child could be anyone's." The old pain settled in her chest like a familiar weight. She'd told this story exactly once before, to Mrs. Harwick when she'd applied for the position here. It hadn't gotten any easier with time. "So you've been alone since you were 7 years old," Aldrich said, and there was something dangerous in his voice now, something that made the air in the small room feel charged with electricity. "I survived," she said simply. "Foster families who needed extra hands, workhouses, eventually a position here. I'm good at being invisible, good at not being a burden." "You are not a burden." The words came out with such fierce conviction that she actually flinched. "You are not disposable or forgettable or any of the other things they made you believe about yourself." "You don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "I'm nobody. I have nothing to offer someone like you. No dowry, no family connections, no political advantages. I'm the bastard daughter of a dead maid and a lord who threw her away like garbage." "And I," Aldrich said, rising from the cot and moving to kneel in front of her chair, "am the king who spent 7 years feeling like half of his soul was missing. Do you think I care about dowries or political advantages when you're sitting in front of me, whole and real and perfect?" His hands covered hers where they rested in her lap, warm and steady and impossibly gentle. "Your father was a fool," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Your mother deserved better than the treatment she received, but their failures don't diminish your worth, Mira. They never could." Tears burned behind her eyes. She'd spent so many years believing that her parents' story was her story, that their shame was her inheritance, that the circumstances of her birth determined the limits of her worth. "I don't know how to be anything but a servant," she whispered. "You don't have to know, not yet." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, sending familiar sparks of warmth up her arms. "I'll teach you. We'll learn together." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you want to? Why would you choose this, choose me, when you could have anyone?" "Because," he said, and his amber eyes were glowing again, that supernatural fire that spoke of things beyond human understanding. "The bond doesn't choose based on politics or bloodlines or social standing. It chooses based on souls, and your soul, Mira, calls to mine like nothing else in this world ever has." The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, so tight it was almost painful. She could feel the truth of his words resonating through the bond, could feel the echo of his certainty reflecting back to her. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I know." His hand squeezed hers gently. "I'm scared too." That surprised her. "You are?" terrified," he said, and there was something almost rueful in his smile. "I've never felt anything like this before, never needed someone the way I need you. It's overwhelming." The admission made something tight in her chest loosen slightly. He was as lost in this as she was, as uncertain about the path forward. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, releasing her hands to reach for the package he'd brought. "I show you that you don't have to be afraid, that I'm not going anywhere, no matter how long it takes for you to believe this is real." He placed the package in her hands. It was heavier than she'd expected, solid and warm. "Open it," he said. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped the brown paper, revealing a leather-bound book. The cover was soft and supple, obviously expensive, with her name embossed in elegant gold lettering across the front. "It's a journal," Aldrich explained. I thought you might want to write down your thoughts, your feelings about all this. It might help make sense of everything." She ran her fingers over her name on the cover, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. No one had ever given her a gift before. Not a real gift, chosen specifically for her, with her name written in gold like she was someone worth remembering. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll trust me," he said quietly. "Say you'll give this a chance. Give us a chance." She looked up into those impossible amber eyes, saw the vulnerability there that matched her own, saw the hope and fear and desperate longing that made him seem less like a king and more like a man who was just as overwhelmed by this impossible situation as she was. "I'll try," she said. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. It transformed him completely, made him look younger and softer, and so beautiful it hurt to look at directly. "That's all I can ask for," he said. "That's more than enough." When he reached for her hand again, she let him take it. When his fingers laced through hers, she didn't pull away. And when the golden warmth in her chest pulsed with something that might have been the beginning of hope, she let herself feel it. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to believe she was worth choosing. Maybe she could learn to believe in impossible things. The weeks that followed were a strange rhythm of stolen moments and careful adjustments. Aldrich appeared at her door each morning with breakfast, and each evening they would walk through his private gardens, away from the prying eyes of the court. During those quiet hours, Mira began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this impossible thing between them could be real. But fairy tales, she was learning, had a way of colliding with harsh reality. The summons came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a page who could barely look her in the eye. The Queen Mother requested her presence in the blue drawing room immediately. Mira's stomach dropped to her feet. In the 3 weeks since Aldrich had claimed her as his mate, she had successfully avoided any meaningful contact with the royal family or the court. She'd been living in a careful bubble, existing in the spaces between official duties, learning to write her thoughts in the leather journal he'd given her, and slowly beginning to believe she might actually belong somewhere. That bubble was about to burst. She dressed carefully in the simple blue gown Aldrich had brought her the week before, still plain by court standards, but made of finer material than anything she'd ever owned. Her hands shook as she braided her hair back in the severe style Mrs. Harwick had always insisted upon. At least that part of her old life still fit. The blue drawing room was aptly named, decorated in shades of azure and gold that spoke of old money and older power. Queen Mother Isabel sat in a high-backed chair that might as well have been a throne, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that added inches to her already imposing height. She was not alone. A woman Mira didn't recognize sat in the chair beside her, beautiful in the way that came from good breeding and better jewels, with perfectly arranged auburn curls and a dress that probably cost more than Mira's former yearly wages. Her green eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. "Ah, Miss Mira," the Queen Mother said, her voice carrying the particular brand of politeness that felt like a blade wrapped in silk. "How lovely to finally meet you properly. Please, sit." It wasn't a request. Mira perched on the edge of the indicated chair, hyper-aware of how out of place she looked in this room full of priceless artifacts and aristocratic grace. "This is Lady Evelyn Ashworth," the Queen Mother continued, gesturing to the beautiful woman beside her. "She's been a dear friend of our family for years. Her father holds significant lands in the northern provinces." Lady Evelyn smiled, but there was something predatory in the expression that made Mira's skin crawl. "I've heard so much about you," Lady Evelyn said, her voice honey-sweet and completely cold. "It must be quite overwhelming going from cleaning floors to, well, whatever it is you think you're doing now." The words hit like a slap, but Mira kept her expression carefully neutral. She'd learned long ago not to react to cruelty from her betters. It only made things worse. "Lady Evelyn was actually supposed to be Aldrich's choice," the Queen Mother said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Before this unfortunate confusion arose, a proper match, you understand. Good bloodline, excellent connections, raised to be a queen." The golden warmth in Mira's chest flickered, threatened by the cold certainty in the older woman's voice. "Of course, we all understand that men can be distracted by certain types of women," Lady Evelyn added delicately, "particularly when those women make themselves so available." Heat flooded Mira's cheeks, but she forced herself to remain silent. Whatever game they were playing, she wouldn't win by engaging. "The thing is, dear," the Queen Mother continued, "this little infatuation of Aldrich's is causing quite a stir among the noble families. They're beginning to question his judgment. Some are even suggesting that perhaps he's not as fit to rule as we once believed." The words landed like physical blows. They weren't just attacking her. They were threatening Aldrich's crown. "I'm sure you can see the problem," Lady Evelyn said, leaning forward with false sympathy. "A king needs the support of his nobles, and they simply cannot accept a servant as their queen. It's not personal, you understand. It's just the natural order of things." Mira's throat felt tight, but she managed to find her voice. "What do you want?" "Smart girl," the Queen Mother said approvingly. "We want you to do the right thing. Leave quietly. Tonight, preferably. We'll provide you with enough coin to start fresh somewhere far from court, perhaps the eastern provinces, where no one knows your history." "And in return," Lady Evelyn added, "Aldrich keeps his crown, the noble families remain loyal, and everyone gets what they truly want." "Everyone except Aldrich," Mira said quietly. "Oh, my dear," the Queen Mother laughed, but the sound held no warmth. "Aldrich is a king first, a man second. He'll do his duty once this temporary madness passes. Men always do, given time and the right incentives." The golden thread in Mira's chest pulsed with pain, with the terrible possibility that they might be right. What if this was just infatuation? What if the bond she felt so strongly was one-sided or temporary, or not enough to overcome the political realities of ruling a kingdom? "Besides," Lady Evelyn said, examining her perfectly manicured nails, "what could you possibly offer him that a real queen couldn't? You have no education, no training, no understanding of statecraft or diplomacy. You'd be a liability, not an asset." Each word was precisely chosen, designed to find the soft spots in Mira's armour and press until something broke. And God help her, it was working. All her old insecurities came flooding back. The bastard child, the servant, the girl who didn't belong anywhere. "You love him, don't you?" the Queen Mother asked, and there was something almost gentle in her voice now. "Then you'll want what's best for him, and what's best for Aldrich is a queen who can actually help him rule, not a distraction who makes his nobles question his fitness to lead." The words hit their mark with devastating accuracy, because she did love him. Somewhere in the past few weeks, between breakfast trays and evening walks and the patient way he listened to her stumbling attempts to believe she was worth choosing, she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with the King of the Seven Kingdoms. And if she loved him, how could she stay and watch his crown crumble because of her? "I need to think about it," she said quietly. "Of course," Lady Evelyn said, But her smile was victorious. "Take all the time you need, but don't take too long. The noble families are growing restless, and their patience isn't infinite." Mira stood on unsteady legs, managing a credible curtsy before fleeing the oppressive atmosphere of the blue drawing-room. She walked quickly through the castle corridors, past tapestries and paintings and artifacts that reminded her at every step that this world was not hers, that she was an interloper in a place where bloodlines mattered more than bonds. She made it to the gardens before the tears started falling. The evening air was cool against her overheated skin, but it did nothing to soothe the ache in her chest. She found herself at the small stone bench where she and Aldrich often sat during their walks, but tonight it felt like a mockery of those precious moments. What if they were right? What if she was being selfish, holding on to something beautiful at the cost of his kingdom's stability? What if loving him meant letting him go? "Mira?" She looked up to find Aldrich approaching, his expression shifting from pleased surprise to concern as he took in her tear-stained face. "What's wrong?" He was beside her in an instant, his hands framing her face with the gentle urgency that always undid her careful defences. "What happened?" For a moment she considered lying, smiling and pretending everything was fine, stealing one more evening of pretending they could have forever. But the weight of Lady Evelyn's words, the Queen Mother's threats, the terrible possibility that she was destroying everything he'd worked for, it was too much to carry alone. "Your mother came to see me today," she said quietly. "She and Lady Evelyn Ashworth." Aldrich's expression darkened immediately. "What did they say to you?" "That I'm going to cost you your crown." The words came out flat, empty of emotion because feeling them hurt too much. "That the noble families are questioning your judgment, that I'm a liability you can't afford." "Mira, are they right?" The question escaped before she could stop it, raw and desperate. "Am I destroying everything you've worked for just by being here?" "No." The word came out with such fierce conviction that she actually flinched. "God, no. Mira, look at me." She forced herself to meet his amber eyes, saw the pain there that matched her own. "You are not destroying anything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the only thing that's ever made sense in my entire life, the only thing that's ever felt real. But if the nobles, then they'll learn to accept what I've chosen," he said, cutting off her protest. "Or they'll find themselves looking for new positions elsewhere." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her, because she could see exactly how this would end. Aldrich choosing her over his kingdom, watching his support crumble, losing everything that mattered to him except her, and eventually, inevitably, resenting her for it. "I can't be the reason you lose your crown," she whispered. "And I can't be a king without you," he said simply. "Don't you understand? For 7 years I was just going through the motions, ruling because it was my duty, not because I cared about any of it. You didn't make me weaker, Mira. You made me human." His hands were still cupping her face, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize were falling again. "I love you," he said, and the words hit her like lightning, like revelation, like the answer to every prayer she'd been too afraid to voice. "I am completely, irrevocably in love with you, and I don't care what my mother thinks, or what Lady Evelyn wants, or what the noble families demand. You are my choice, and I will choose you every day for the rest of my life." The golden thread in her chest flared to life, singing with recognition and desperate hope, and the terrible, wonderful weight of being chosen by someone who meant it. But love, she was learning, wasn't always enough. "What if choosing me costs you everything else?" she asked. "Then everything else wasn't worth having," he said without hesitation. When he kissed her, soft and desperate and full of promises she wasn't sure either of them could keep, she let herself believe him, let herself imagine a world where love conquered politics, where bastard servants could become queens, where fairy tale endings were possible even in the harsh light of reality. But as they sat together in the gathering darkness, his arms around her and her head on his shoulder, a cold certainty settled in her chest. She was going to have to choose between her happiness and his kingdom. And if she truly loved him, there was really only one choice she could make. The decision came for her 3 days later in the form of a formal summons that arrived with the morning light. By royal decree, the court would convene in formal session to address the matter of His Majesty's intended mate. All nobles of standing were commanded to attend. The matter would be put to the ancient right of challenge and consent, where the worthiness of a royal match could be formally questioned before the assembled court. Mira's hands shook as she read the parchment. She understood exactly what this meant. Lady Evelyn and the Queen Mother had grown tired of waiting for her to leave quietly. They were forcing the issue, dragging her worthiness into the harsh light of public scrutiny, where her humble origins would be dissected like a carcass before wolves. Aldrich appeared at her door before she'd finished reading, his face dark with fury. "Don't even think about running," he said without preamble, crossing the small room in 2 strides to grip her shoulders with gentle urgency. "Whatever you're thinking right now, whatever fears they've planted in your head, push them aside. We face this together." "Aldrich," she whispered, "they're going to tear me apart, in front of everyone, every shameful detail of my birth, my mother's disgrace, my father's rejection. It's all going to be laid bare for the entertainment of people who already believe I'm beneath them." "Let them try," he said, and there was something dangerous in his voice now, something that reminded her that beneath the gentle man who brought her breakfast and held her hand in moonlit gardens was a king who commanded armies and ruled kingdoms. "Let them question your worth in front of me. Let them dare." The golden thread in her chest pulsed with his fierce protectiveness, but it did nothing to ease the terror clawing at her throat. "What if they're right?" she asked. "What if I really am unsuitable? What if—" "Mira." He cupped her face in his hands, amber eyes blazing. "Do you trust me?" The question was simple. The answer was not. Did she trust him? With her heart, absolutely. With her safety, without question. But did she trust that his love would be enough to overcome centuries of tradition, bloodline politics, and the united opposition of every noble family in the kingdom? Yes, she said anyway, because loving him meant believing in him, even when her rational mind whispered that this was impossible. "Then trust me now," he said, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Trust that I know what I'm doing. Trust that you are worth fighting for." 4 hours later, Mira stood at the entrance to the great hall, wearing the finest gown Aldrich had ever given her, deep blue silk that complemented her eyes and made her skin glow like porcelain. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had taken 2 maids the better part of an hour to achieve. She looked, for perhaps the first time in her life, like she might actually belong in this world. It was about to be proven that appearances were deceiving. The great hall was packed with every noble of consequence from the 7 kingdoms. Lords and ladies in their finest regalia, merchants wealthy enough to buy titles, diplomats from allied nations, all gathered to witness what would either be her triumph or her complete humiliation. At the far end of the hall, Aldrich sat on the throne of kings, resplendent in formal robes and the crown that marked him as sovereign of the realm. But his eyes found hers the moment she entered, and the intensity of his gaze sent warmth flooding through her chest. To his right, on the smaller throne reserved for the Queen Mother, sat Lady Isabel, her expression carved from ice. To his left stood Lady Evelyn, gorgeous in emerald silk and the confidence of a woman who had never doubted her place in the world. "Approach," called the court herald, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Mira walked down the seemingly endless aisle between the assembled nobles, acutely aware of every whisper, every judgmental stare, every barely concealed sneer. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment, but she forced herself to move with as much dignity as she could muster. When she reached the dais, she sank into the deepest curtsy she could manage, holding the position until Aldrich's voice cut through the silence. "Rise, Mirror of House Harrington." The formal acknowledgement of her father's name sent a ripple of surprise through the crowd. She rose slowly, keeping her eyes fixed on Aldrich's face like an anchor in a storm. "We are gathered today," the herald announced, "to address the ancient right of challenge and consent regarding His Majesty's choice of mate. Who stands to question this union?" Lady Evelyn stepped forward with fluid grace, her smile sharp as a blade. "I do," she declared, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "On behalf of the noble families of this realm, I question the suitability of this match." "State your challenge," Aldrich said, his voice carefully neutral, but Mira could see the tension in his jaw. "This woman," Lady Evelyn said, gesturing toward Mira with obvious disdain, "is the bastard daughter of a disgraced maid. She has no education, no training in statecraft, no understanding of the duties required of a queen. Worse, she was employed as a servant in this very castle, cleaning floors and emptying chamber pots. To elevate such a person to the throne would be an insult to every noble family that has served this kingdom faithfully for generations." Each word was carefully chosen for maximum impact, designed to reduce Mira to nothing more than her worst moments, her most shameful origins. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled crowd. "Furthermore," Lady Evelyn continued, warming to her theme, "this alleged bond is nothing more than base infatuation, a temporary madness that will fade once His Majesty comes to his senses and remembers his duties to the kingdom." "Are you finished?" Aldrich asked, and there was ice in his voice now. "I am," Lady Evelyn said, looking supremely satisfied with herself. Aldrich rose from his throne, and the hall fell silent as death. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of a king who had never been challenged and found the experience wanting. "You speak of suitability," he said, his amber eyes fixed on Lady Evelyn with predatory intensity. "Let me tell you about suitability. This woman," he gestured toward Mira, "has survived abandonment, abuse, and a lifetime of being told she was worthless, and yet she remains kind. She has every reason to be bitter, cruel, vengeful, and instead she shows compassion to everyone she meets." He stepped down from the dais, moving to stand beside Mira with fluid grace. "You speak of education," he continued. "She may not know the names of every duke and duchess, but she understands suffering in a way that you never could. She knows what it means to go hungry, to be afraid, to have nowhere safe to turn, and that understanding will make her a better queen than someone who has never known hardship." Lady Evelyn's confident expression was beginning to crack around the edges. "You speak of duty," Aldrich said, and now his voice carried the rumble of barely leashed power. "My duty is to this kingdom, yes, but it is also to the bond that the gods themselves forged between us. To deny that bond, to cast aside my mate for political convenience, would be to spit in the face of the very forces that blessed my bloodline with the right to rule." He took Mira's hand in his, and the golden warmth flared to life so strongly she gasped. Around them, the assembled nobles leaned forward, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. "You question her worth," Aldrich said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Let me make something very clear to all of you. Mira is not suitable to be queen because she was born to it, or trained for it, or because her bloodline demands it. She is suitable because I choose her, because my wolf recognizes her as mate, because she is the other half of my soul." He turned to face the assembled court, still holding Mira's hand like a lifeline. "Any who question this choice question me," he declared. "Any who refuse to accept her refuse to accept their king. And any who think they can force me to abandon my mate for political expedience will find themselves gravely mistaken about the limits of my patience." The silence that followed was deafening. Mira could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the weight of hundreds of stares, could sense the shift in the room's atmosphere as noble families realized their king was not going to be swayed by tradition or threats. Lady Evelyn's face had gone pale, but she rallied with desperate determination. "Your Majesty," she said, "surely you cannot mean to—" "I can," Aldrich cut her off, "and I do. Furthermore, any family that cannot accept my choice is free to find themselves new lands to govern, perhaps in neighbouring kingdoms where their particular brand of narrow-mindedness will be more welcome." The threat was delivered with casual elegance, but its impact was immediate. Mira could see nobles throughout the hall exchanging worried glances, suddenly realising that their opposition might cost them more than they were willing to pay. "Now," Aldrich continued, turning back to Mira with a smile that transformed his entire face, "I believe there was mention of ancient rights. Very well. By the customs of our fathers and the bonds that unite us, I claim this woman as my mate, my queen, and my equal before gods and mortals alike." He drew her closer, his free hand cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness. "Mira of House Harrington," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "do you accept this bond? Do you choose me as I have chosen you?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and terror, and the weight of changing her entire life with a single word. She looked into his amber eyes and saw her future there, saw love and protection and the promise that she would never again have to face the world alone. Saw a man who was willing to risk his crown for her, willing to face down the combined opposition of every noble family in the kingdom because he believed she was worth fighting for. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, so that everyone could hear. "Yes, I choose you. I choose this bond. I choose love over fear." When he kissed her, right there in front of the assembled court, the golden thread between them flared so brightly she could swear the entire hall was bathed in warm light. The bond snapped into place with an almost audible click, settling into her bones like it had always belonged there. Around them, the court erupted into chaos. Some nobles applauded, swept up in the romance of the moment. Others sat in stunned silence, processing the reality that their king had just chosen love over politics in the most public way possible. And Lady Evelyn, her face twisted with rage and humiliation, gathered her skirts and fled the hall, her dreams of a crown crumbling to ash behind her. But Mira didn't see any of it. She was lost in amber eyes and the taste of promises on her king's lips, finally, completely certain that she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks that followed the formal court assembly passed in a whirlwind of impossible adjustments and gentle transformations that still felt like dreams Mira might wake from at any moment. Gone were the days of stolen moments and careful secrecy. Now she walked through the castle corridors, on Aldrich's arm, wearing gowns that made her feel like royalty, and accepting the deep curtsies of servants who had once worked alongside her. The adjustment was overwhelming, but Aldrich was there for every step, patient and encouraging as she learned to navigate this new world that was somehow hers. The most remarkable change, though, was in herself. 3 months after that terrifying day in the Great Hall, Mira stood before the mirror in what was now their shared chambers, barely recognising the woman looking back at her. She still had the same dark hair, the same blue eyes, the same face that had once seemed so unremarkable, but something fundamental had shifted. There was confidence in her posture now, strength in her gaze, a sense of belonging that radiated from her very bones. "You're thinking too loudly," Aldrich said from behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "I can feel your thoughts spinning from across the room." She leaned back against his solid warmth, marvelling as she always did at how perfectly they fit together. The golden thread between them hummed with contentment, a constant source of comfort that she no longer questioned or feared. "I was thinking about how different everything is," she admitted. "How different I am." "Not different," he corrected gently. "Just finally free to be who you were, always meant to be." Through the mirror, she watched him press a soft kiss to the curve of her neck, saw the way his amber eyes glowed with love and possession, and the kind of fierce protectiveness that had become as essential to her as breathing. "Are you ready?" he asked. Today was the day they would return to the western provinces, to the village where she had been born and the noble house where her mother had once served. Word had already been sent ahead that the king and his queen-to-be would be making a formal visit to Lord Harrington's estate. Mira's father didn't know yet that his bastard daughter was coming home wearing a crown. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. The journey to the western provinces took 2 days of travel through countryside that grew increasingly familiar as they approached her childhood haunts. Mira rode beside Aldrich in the royal carriage, watching through the windows as they passed villages she remembered from her years of wandering between foster families and workhouses. When they finally crested the hill that overlooked Lord Harrington's estate, Mira felt her breath catch in her throat. The grand house looked exactly as she remembered from the few times she'd glimpsed it as a child. Imposing stone walls, manicured gardens, windows that gleamed like jewels in the afternoon sunlight. "Second thoughts?" Aldrich asked quietly, his hand finding hers. "No," she said, and realized she meant it. "I'm not that frightened little girl anymore. I'm your queen." The transformation in her voice, the quiet authority that had developed over months of learning to accept her worth, made Aldrich smile with pride. Lord Harrington himself was waiting in the main courtyard when their carriage arrived, flanked by his wife and what must have been half the household staff. He was older than Mira remembered, his dark hair now streaked with silver, but his eyes held the same cold calculation that had dismissed her so easily all those years ago. He had no idea who she was. She could see it in his face as he stepped forward to offer the traditional welcome to visiting royalty. Polite deference with just enough subservience to acknowledge Aldrich's superior rank, but no recognition at all for the woman at his side. "Your Majesty," Lord Harrington said, offering a precise bow, "you honour my humble estate with your presence." "Lord Harrington," Aldrich replied coolly. "May I present my betrothed, Queen-elect Mira of House Harrington." The introduction hung in the air like a challenge. Mira watched as comprehension slowly dawned on her father's face, saw the exact moment when he connected the dots between the ragged child he'd cast aside and the royal figure standing before him. His face went white as parchment. "That's impossible," he breathed. You can't mean—" "I believe you knew my mother," Mira said, her voice steady and clear. "Eleanor. She worked in your kitchens about 25 years ago." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Lord Harrington's wife stepped closer to her husband, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as she realized exactly what kind of scandal was standing in her courtyard wearing royal silks. "You threw her out," Mira continued, advancing a single step. Not threatening, just claiming her space with the quiet confidence that had taken months to develop. "When she told you she was carrying your child, you called her a whore and had her removed from your lands with nothing but the clothes on her back." That is to say," Lord Harrington stammered, looking desperately between Mira and Aldrich, as if hoping the king might contradict the terrible truth being laid bare. "She died when I was 7, Mira said. Cold and hunger and the kind of despair that comes from being discarded by someone who should have protected her. And you've spent the last 18 years pretending I didn't exist." "Your Majesty," Lord Harrington addressed Aldrich with desperate urgency, "surely there's been some mistake. This woman, whoever she is, she cannot possibly—" "Are you suggesting," Aldrich said, his voice dropping to the dangerous register that had cowed hostile nobles and enemy kings, "that I don't know my own mate, that I am somehow confused about the identity of my chosen queen?" The threat in those words was unmistakable. Lord Harrington's face went from white to grey as he realised the magnitude of his situation. He had not just rejected a bastard child all those years ago. He had rejected the future queen of the 7 kingdoms. "No, your Majesty, I would never presume," he began. But Mira held up a hand to stop him. "It's too late for apologies," she said quietly. "Too late to claim paternal affection you never felt. I'm not here for your acknowledgement or your regret. I'm here because a king's justice must be served." She turned to Aldrich, who nodded once in understanding. "Lord Harrington," Aldrich said, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority, "you stand accused of abandoning your blood, of casting out a defenceless woman carrying your child, and of denying aid to your own daughter when she was orphaned and alone. How do you answer these charges?" The formal language transformed this from a family confrontation into a matter of royal justice. Lord Harrington fell to his knees in the gravel of his own courtyard, finally understanding that his past cruelties had caught up with him. "Guilty, your Majesty," he whispered. "All of it. I am guilty of all of it." "Then hear your sentence," Aldrich said. "Your lands and titles are forfeit to the crown. You and your family have 7 days to remove yourselves from this estate. You will be granted a modest pension, more generosity than you showed to Elena or her daughter, and you will live quietly in whatever exile you choose. But you will never again hold authority over others, never again have the power to destroy lives through your callousness." Lady Harrington made a sound like a wounded animal, but Lord Harrington just nodded in defeated acceptance. He was a man who understood the brutal mathematics of power, and he knew he had been weighed in the scales and found wanting. "Furthermore," Mira added, her voice ringing across the courtyard, "this estate will be converted into a home for displaced women and children. Those who have been abandoned, cast out, or left with nowhere else to turn will find sanctuary here. They will be fed, clothed, educated, and given the chance to build new lives with dignity." The poetic justice of it was not lost on anyone present. The very place where her mother had been discarded would become a haven for others suffering the same cruel fate. As Lord Harrington and his family retreated into their house to begin the process of packing their lives into trunks, Mira felt a strange sense of closure settling over her. Not satisfaction exactly. There was no joy in watching anyone's world crumble, even someone who had caused such pain, but a feeling of balance being restored to the universe. "How do you feel?" Aldrich asked as they walked through the gardens where her mother had once worked. "Free," she said after a moment of consideration. "For the first time in my life, completely free." They stayed at the estate for 3 days, overseeing the transition and meeting with the stewards who would manage the new sanctuary. On their final evening, as they sat in what had once been Lord Harrington's private study, Aldrich reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. "I have something for you," he said, and his voice held a note of nervous anticipation that made her heart skip. Inside the box was a ring unlike anything she had ever seen. The central stone was a perfect amber gem that seemed to glow with inner fire, surrounded by diamonds that caught the lamplight like captured stars. It was beautiful, yes, but more than that, it was powerful. She could feel the magic humming in the ancient metal, could sense the weight of history and ceremony in its elegant design. "This is the Queen's ring," Aldrich explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "Worn by every queen of the 7 kingdoms for the past 4 centuries. My grandmother's ring and her grandmother's before her. It's yours now, as you are mine." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand, as if it had been waiting all these centuries for her specifically to claim it. "Marry me," he said simply, "not because duty demands it, not because politics require it, but because I cannot imagine a single day of my life without you in it. Marry me because you love me as fiercely as I love you." "Yes," she said, and the word came out breathless with joy and wonder, and the overwhelming certainty that this was always how their story was meant to end. "Yes, of course, yes." When he kissed her, the amber stone in her ring flared with golden light that matched the warmth singing through the bond between them. In that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of old pain and the promises of new beginnings, Mira understood that she had finally found her place in the world. Not because she had been born to it, but because she had chosen it. Not because it was her destiny, but because it was her decision. And as they held each other in the lamplight of her father's former study, planning their future in whispered promises and shared dreams, Mira knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Home, at last, in the arms of the man who had searched 7 kingdoms to find her and would spend the rest of his life proving she was worth the quest. Where are you listening from? I'd love to hear your thoughts about Mira and Aldrich's journey in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of fated mates and impossible love, please take 2 seconds to subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people discover these stories of hope and healing. Thank you for being part of our pack, and I'll see you in the next adventure.